In the dark waters of Guadalcanal, Japanese sailors would whisper about an American cruiser whose guns fired so fast that they sounded like a giant machine gun ripping through canvas. They weren't imagining things. The USS Helena, CL-50, was a ship the Japanese would learn to fear, a cruiser that survived what should have killed her at Pearl Harbor, only to return to battle with a vengeance that reshaped naval warfare in the Pacific. This is the story of the ship that refused to die, the machine gun cruiser whose firepower became legend, and the 1,000 men who gave her steel a soldat in an era when battleships ruled and aircraft carriers were becoming the future. Helena proved that even a light cruiser, armed with speed, determination, and unmatched firepower, could change the tide of history. The story of USS Helena doesn't begin in battle, but in the depths of the Great Depression. As America slowly tried to revive its broken economy, the Navy launched a modernization program to replace its aging fleet. From this effort came the St. Louis-class cruisers, ships designed to unleash overwhelming firepower while still being fast enough to manner of death itself. On a cold December day in 1936, as Helena's keel touched the ways at Brooklyn Navy Yard, no one watching could imagine the destiny of hull number 50. The workers riveting her plates and shaping her armor weren't just building a ship. They were forging an instrument of survival, a weapon of revenge. Helena stretched 608 feet from bow to stern with a slender beam of 61 feet. But her true power lived in her gun's 15 6-inch Mark 16 rifles mounted in 5 triple turrets. These weren't ordinary naval guns. Each barrel could spit out 8 to 10 rounds per minute under perfect conditions. 15 guns firing at full speed meant Helena could hurl nearly 150 shells every minute. It was enough firepower to turn night into day. It was no wonder the Japanese later called her the machine gun cruiser. Her secondary batteries added even more. Bite 8 5-inch dual-purpose guns capable of tearing apart aircraft or shredding enemy destroyers. 4 Parsons turbines drove her through the Pacific at 32.5 knots, powered by 8 Babcock and Wilcox boilers generating 100,000 horsepower. With a range of 10,000 nautical miles, Helena could hunt anywhere on the vast Pacific battlefield. But her steel alone wasn't what made her special. Helena carried 868 officers and men, ordinary Americans, who would turn her metal, engines, and gunpowder into something close to immortality. Helena slipped into the East River on August 27, 1938, christened by the wife of a Montana senator. The bottle of champagne shattered across her bow meant to bring good luck. Whether it did depended on how one defines luck. Her early service reads like a quiet prelude before the storm. After commissioning in September 1939, Helena sailed to Uruguay, where her crew saw something that stayed with them: the wreck of the German pocket battleship Admiral Graf Spee, lying at anchor in Montevideo after the Battle of the River Plate. Young American sailors stared at the twisted steel and wondered whether such a fate awaited them one day. By September 1940, Helena joined the Pacific Fleet. Months in Hawaiian waters honed her crew into warriors' gunnery drills, navigation practice, damage control exercises repeated endlessly. When 1941 approached its end, Helena entered Pearl Harbor's Navy Yard for upgrades, receiving new 1.1-inch anti-aircraft guns, like giving a seasoned boxer brass knuckles. Just before a street brawl, on the morning of December 7, 1941, Helena sat moored at berth 1010 in Pearl Harbor's Navy Yard. The battleship USS Pennsylvania was supposed to be in that spot, but repairs and dry dock changed the plan, a twist of fate that saved Pennsylvania and nearly doomed Helena. At 7:57 a.m., Lieutenant Commander Shigeru Murata led 9 torpedo bombers toward what he thought was Pennsylvania. Through the haze, Helena's silhouette looked similar enough to seal her fate. Only the lead plane released a torpedo Type 91 weapon, slicing through their harbor at 40 knots. It passed under the old mine layer Oglala tied beside Helena and slammed into Helena's hull at frame 75, just below her armor belt. The blast tore through her engineering spaces. Boiler room No. 2 and engine room No. 1 were instantly transformed into wreckage and rising seawater. Men died where they stood. Water poured through a hole big enough for a truck to drive through. But Helena was already fighting for her life. Within 2 minutes, just 120 seconds, her forward diesel generator coughed to life. Power surged to her guns. As Japanese bombers returned for their second attack, Helena's anti-aircraft weapons roared in defiance. 4 bombs splashed close aboard during the next wave, sending shards of steel across her decks. She should have sunk. But through miracles of damage control and raw human will, Helena stayed alive. 40 of her men died. 100 were wounded. But the Japanese pilots who reported her sinking were wrong. They had awakened a giant's little sister, and she would never forget Dot in the days after Pearl Harbor. Helena looked like a patient in critical condition. Emergency pumps strained to keep her afloat. But her heart, the stubborn spirit of her crew, kept beating. 2 days after the attack, she entered dry dock No. 2, where workers swarmed over her like surgeons. Temporary patches sealed her torn hull, buying her enough strength to make a long, dangerous trip to Mare Island in January 1942. Tall Pacific swells tested every weld, slamming into her wounded side. The crew stood ready at damage control stations, watching for leaks. But Helena held. She always held Dot at Mare Island. Helena was reborn. Pearl Harbor had taught the Navy brutal lessons, and Helena became one of the first ships rebuilt with that knowledge. Her old enclosed conning tower, useless at night, was replaced with an open bridge. The outdated 1.1-inch Chicago piano guns were removed, replaced by 4 quadruple 40mm Bofors mounts, some of the finest anti-aircraft weapons in the world. But Helena's most important weapon wasn't a gun. It was electronics. She received the SG surface search radar, technology that allowed her to see enemy ships through night, fog, and rain at distances that seemed like magic. Combined with new fire control radars, Helena could now fight with deadly precision, even in total darkness. Under Captain Robert H. English, and later Captain Charles P. Hoover, her crew trained with relentless intensity. Every sailor knew why they trained. They were going back to the Pacific not as victims, but as hunters. By July 1942, Helena was ready for war again. As she passed beneath the Golden Gate Bridge, men lined the rails. Some waved to wives and girlfriends on shore. Others stared across the Pacific toward the enemy who had drawn first blood. The machine gun cruiser was returning. The Solomon Islands, in 1942, were a green nightmare. Guadalcanal, with its crucial airfield, became the grinding wheel on which American and Japanese forces bled. Every night, Japanese destroyers and cruisers raced down the slot, the narrow channel between the islands, delivering troops and bombarding American positions. By October, Helena served under Rear Admiral Norman Scott in Task Force 64. Unlike many American admirals who still clung to old battleship tactics, Scott understood that radar and rapid fire would rule these waters. He trained his ships for night combat constantly. Curiously, he made USS San Francisco his flagship instead of the radar-equipped Helena, a decision that would soon matter. October 11, 1942, American aircraft spotted. Admiral Aritomo Goto's force heading toward Guadalcanal. 3 heavy cruisers and 2 destroyers, bringing reinforcements and shells to bombard American positions. Scott positioned his ships off Cape Esperance, ready to spring a trap. As night fell, Helena's SG radar operator Radioman Third Class Robert S. Brown hunched over his screen. At 23:25, a glowing dot appeared. Enemy ships 27,700 yards away. Helena had found the Japanese long before they knew Americans were waiting. What followed was part chaos, part genius. Scott, blind without radar, ordered a maneuver that accidentally crossed the Japanese T, the perfect tactical position for an ambush. On Helena's bridge, Captain Hoover watched his radar show enemy ships at just 5,000 yards, almost point-blank range, but no order to fire had been given. Finally, at 23:46, an ambiguous "Roger" from Scott was interpreted as permission. Helena unleashed Hell Dot. Her first volley slammed into the heavy cruiser Aoba, killing Admiral Gatu instantly. The Japanese admiral died, believing his own ships had mistakenly fired on him. He never imagined Americans could strike with such precision in the dark. Helena's guns fired at impossible speeds. Brass casings rolled across her decks like golden rain as loaders worked in perfect rhythm. Continuous muzzle flashes lit the night, giving her the nickname she would carry to her grave, the Heavy Cruiser. Furutaka turned to protect the flagship, but sailed directly into Helena's storm of steel. One of her long-range torpedoes detonated on deck, turning the ship into an inferno. Before she sank dot in just 14 minutes, the battle ended. Helena had fired more than 1,400 shells. Her barrels glowed red in the darkness. Cape Esperance became America's first clear surface victory against the Imperial Navy, and Helena proved that American cruisers could fight and win in the enemy's chosen battlefield. Night. As dawn broke over Guadalcanal, the waters were streaked with oil and littered with debris, the grim markers of Japanese ships lost the night before. Helena's crew, exhausted yet exhilarated, tasted their first true victory. And they knew it wouldn't be their last. November 1942 brought desperation to both sides. The Japanese were preparing a massive reinforcement convoy, while Rear Admiral Daniel Callahan now led Admiral Scott's victorious task force. Brave but inexperienced in night combat, Callahan repeated Scott's error. He chose USS San Francisco as his flagship instead of the radar-equipped Helena. On the night of November 12th to 13th, Helena's radar once again proved its worth. At 1:24, her SG scope detected Japanese ships entering Iron Batam, sound the waters around Guadalcanal, so littered with wrecks that they had earned their grim nickname. Leading the bombardment were two Japanese battleships, Hiei and Kirishima, whose mission was to police Henderson Field. What erupted at 1:48 was less a battle and more a chaotic bar fight with 14-inch guns. The American column collided nearly point-blank with the Japanese force. Searchlights stabbed through the darkness. Star shells burst overhead, and tracers crisscrossed like deadly fireworks. Helena's radar gave her a critical edge. While other American ships struggled to identify targets, her fire control tracked Japanese vessels with electronic precision. She opened fire on a target believed to be a battleship at just 4,200 yards. Rapid-fire salvos tore along the enemy ship's length, sparking fires and explosions. The destroyer Akatsuki made the fatal mistake of illuminating Helena with her searchlight. Every American ship that could bear joined in. Helena's 6-inch shells, combined with 5-inch and 8-inch fire, turned Akatsuki into a massive explosion, leaving only a handful of survivors. Helena then shifted her guns to 3 more destroyers. Firing so fast, the Japanese survivors thought the Americans had invented a new automatic cannon. One burned and limped away. Another went dead in the water, and the third vanished into the darkness, trailing smoke. Through it all, Helena danced between salvos, her engineers pushing turbines to the limit. At one point, San Francisco crossed between Helena and her target, forcing ace fire that probably saved American lives. Friendly fire chaos claimed Admiral Callahan and Captain Cassin Young of San Francisco, killed by American shells in the confusion. After 40 minutes of brutal, point-blank combat, the Japanese withdrew. The battered force left behind ships with jammed rudders targets for American planes the following morning. One Japanese battleship had been lost, the first of the war. Helena emerged with minor damage and only one casualty. Her gunners had fired over 1,500 rounds, barrels scorched from sustained fire. But the Tokyo Express had been stopped, and Henderson Field survived, ready to launch planes that would strike Japanese transports in the days to come. As November 13th dawned, Iron Baton Sound lived up to its name with new wrecks scattered across the seafloor. Helena had proven herself again, but each battle took a heavier toll. Between these legendary engagements, life aboard Helena was a grinding routine, testing men as much as combat. The Solomon Islands offered no respite. If Japanese shells didn't kill you, tropical diseases might. Helena's crew developed the 1,000-yard stare common among Guadalcanal veterans, men aged beyond their years by constant vigilance. Life aboard Helena followed the rhythm of war. General quarters sounded at dawn and dusk, when submarines preferred to attack. Days were spent bombarding Japanese positions on Guadalcanal, turning jungle-strong points into moonscapes. Nights of the sea, radar operators strained to detect the first glimpse of enemy vessels. The crew developed their own culture, born from shared danger. Helena's laundry became legendary, somehow keeping uniforms pressed even after battle. The ship's band, Helena's Hottentots, played swing music on deck between actions, their jazzy renditions of blues in the night, drifting across the water to other ships. Food was whatever supply ships brought: Spam, powdered eggs, and coffee straw enough to float a wrench. Fresh vegetables were memories. When the ice cream maker worked, a simple Dixie cup of vanilla became the most coveted commodity in the South Pacific. Captain Hoover was a steady hand. Unlike glory-seeking officers, he understood that survival equaled victory. He drilled the crew relentlessly, but knew when to allow small comforts, movie nights on the fantail, boxing matches on the forecastle. These fleeting pleasures reminded the men why they fought. The crew was shaken when Hoover was relieved on November 23rd for failing to report the torpedoing of USS Juneau. Many saw it as bureaucratic revenge after they had survived hell together. His replacement, Captain Charles P. Cecil, assumed command in December 1942 and faced the challenge of winning over a weary crew. Cecil would lead Helena through her final battles, December 1942 and January 1943 blurred together in a rhythm of duty and exhaustion. Helena bombarded targets at Vella Lavella and Munda, supported troop convoys, and chased ghost contacts on radar screens. Her crew became experts at reading the sea and sky. Knowing survival often depended on spotting a torpedo wake or bomb release a second before the enemy. By February 1943, Helena desperately needed yard time. Her engines wheezed, her guns showed worn rifling, and her hull bore scars from near misses. The voyage to Sydney, Australia, felt like a brief paradise: fresh food, cold beer, and the comfort of English conversation. For a few precious weeks, the men remembered what peace felt like. But war doesn't pause. By April, Helena returned to the Solomons. Her guns were refreshed, her crew rested. The next phase of the island campaign beckoned, and nightly runs down the slot continued. The machine gun cruiser had more work to do. As spring turned to summer 1943, American forces prepared to advance up the Solomon chain. New Georgia, with its airfield at Munda, was the next bloody step toward Tokyo. Helena took part in preliminary bombardments, turning Japanese positions into rubble. The routine was deadly familiar: slip into contested waters under darkness, strike assigned targets, and escape before dawn. On May 13th, Helena led a bombardment against Vella Lavella, her shells systematically destroying fuel dumps and barracks. The Japanese had moved most assets inland, but Helena's guns still found plenty to destroy. June 1943 brought intensified operations. Intelligence reported massive Japanese reinforcement efforts, and every American cruiser worked overtime to intercept them. Helena's crew, now veterans, prepared with grim efficiency. Extra ammunition filled her magazines. Damage control supplies were prepositioned. Men wrote letters home just in case. On June 30th, Operation Toenails, the invasion of New Georgia began. Helena provided fire support for the landings at Rendova. Her 6-inch shells cleared Thangel in 100-yard swaths. Japanese shore batteries responded sporadically, but counter-battery fire silenced them. July 4, 1943, Independence. They found Helena bombarding Munda Airfield. The Japanese had reinforced anti-aircraft positions, black puffs of flak dotting the sky. Helena's Bofors and 5-inch guns returned fire, creating a deadly fireworks display. Democracy and fascism fought across the sky in tracers. That evening, Helena fueled at Tulagi, taking on oil and ammunition for another night's work. Intelligence reported another Tokyo Express run destroyers racing south with reinforcements for New Georgia. Task Force 68, with Helena's a key component, would intercept them in Kula Gulf. The crew sensed something different. Maybe it was the full moon, eliminating the darkness that usually hid American ships, though their radar still functioned perfectly. Perhaps it was reports of Japanese heavy cruisers joining the convoy. Or maybe it was simply the law of averages catching up. Helena had survived too many battles unscathed. As July 5th turned to July 6th, Helena entered Kula Gulf for the last time. Her radar operators, among the best in the fleet, would spot the enemy first. As always, her guns would speak with characteristic rapid fury. But this time, the enemy struck back with a vengeance even Helena could not survive. The moon rose over Kula Gulf like a spotlight, turning black water silver and robbing the Americans of their usual concealment. Admiral Walden Ainsworth, flying his flag from Honolulu, led Task Force 68 into the Gulf just after midnight. Helena followed in column, radar already picking up contacts to the northwest. The Japanese had learned from past encounters. Admiral Teruo Akiyama's reinforcement group included 10 destroyers armed with deadly Type 93 long-lance torpedoes, capable of reaching 20,000 yards at 49 knots. More importantly, the Japanese had finally developed tactics to counter American radar. At 1:36, Helena detected the enemy at 22,000 yards. For once, Japanese radar operators matched American detection, spotting Task Force 68 almost simultaneously. Both sides approached, knowing this would be a high-speed gunfight where speed mattered more than armor. At 1:57, Admiral Ainsworth ordered the attack. Helena's turrets, already tracking targets, erupted. Her first salvos targeted the destroyer Nayuzuki, Admiral Akiyama's flagship. At 11,000 yards, the range was ideal for Helena's experienced crews. Nayuzuki never stood a chance. Helena's second salvo hit squarely, and subsequent rounds tore through her torpedo warheads, shattered her bridge, and ripped her hull apart. Admiral Akiyama died in the opening minutes, his final sight the muzzle flashes spelling his doom. Even as Nayuzuki sank, her sister ships had already unleashed their deadly torpedoes. 10 Japanese destroyers fired volleys of Type 93, long-lance torpedoes before turning sharply away, a tactic prioritizing torpedo accuracy over gunfire. Nearly 50 torpedoes now raced through Kula Gulf, streaking toward the American column. Helena shifted fire to the destroyer Suzuki, her radar-guided shells finding their mark despite the distance. But a critical error would seal her fate. Her first salvos had used flashless powder, specifically reserved for night actions to hide her position. Once those charges ran out, Helena switched to standard propellant, each salvo now lighting up the night like lightning, clearly revealing her location to Japanese torpedo directors. At 2:03, Helena's luck ran out. 3 torpedoes struck in quick succession, and the machine gun cruiser's final battle began. The first hit forward of turret 1. The explosion was catastrophic. Either the forward magazine detonated, or the torpedo's 1,080-pound warhead obliterated the bow. Turret 1 vanished in a towering pillar of flame, reaching 200 feet skyward. The blast rolled through the ship, buckling bulkheads and throwing men against steel walls like rag dolls, before damage control teams could respond. The second and third torpedoes slammed in ships below the armor belt. The keel of the ship's backbone was broken. Engine rooms flooded instantly, turbines screamed to a stop, and electrical power failed, plunging the interior into darkness, lit only by battle lanterns and fire. Captain Cecil immediately recognized the inevitable. With a broken keel, Helena was already beginning to jackknife. He issued the order every captain dreads: abandon ship. Yet Helena's gunners refused to surrender. Even as the cruiser settled into the sea, her aft turrets continued firing. Turret 4 fired until seawater filled the handling rooms, while Turret 5's crew manually trained their guns, continuing to fire until the list made it impossible to elevate the barrels. Helena broke into 3 sections. The bow, everything forward of Turret 2, had vanished. The stern section, carrying nearly 400 men, floated independently. The center section, containing the bridge and most engineering spaces, rolled over and sank within minutes. Men struggled in oil-slicked water, some wounded, all shocked by the abrupt shift from battle to survival. The destroyer Nicholas, braving potential torpedo attack, moved in to rescue survivors. Her crew pulled exhausted sailors aboard while returning fire on Japanese destroyers attempting to finish off Helena's remaining men. Dawn on July 6th revealed a gulf littered with debris and nearly 500 survivors clinging to wreckage. The bow and stern sections served as temporary lifeboats, keeping hundreds afloat. But Japanese aircraft would arrive with daylight, and Admiral Ainsworth faced a grim decision. Nicholas and Radford had rescued 739 men during the night, forming human chains to haul oil-soaked survivors aboard. Radar still showed Japanese warships nearby, and dawn meant almost certain air attack. Ainsworth ordered withdrawal, leaving hundreds of Helena's men behind. For those remaining, July 6th became a grueling test of endurance and will. The tropical sun burned exposed skin. Saltwater tortured wounds, and sharks drawn by blood circled the survivors. Men grouped together, supporting the wounded and sharing the few life rafts available. On Helena's floating stern, Lieutenant Commander John L.C.H.U. organized the survivors. With limited food, water, and medical supplies, he established watches, rationed essentials, and maintained discipline. When Japanese float planes strafed the wreckage, men dived beneath twisted steel for cover. That night, 2 American destroyers attempted a rescue, but were driven off by Japanese warships. The survivors endured another night, clinging to debris, their numbers dwindling as wounded men succumbed and sharks claimed others. The story could have ended there. But Coast Watcher Reverend A.W.E. Sylvester on Vella Lavella Island reported the survivors' location and coordinated with local natives to guide rescue efforts. On the night of July 7th or 8th, destroyers Nicholas and Jenkins, along with fast transports Dent and Waters, returned to Kula Gulf, using whaleboats and rubber rafts. They pulled 165 men from the water and the floating stern section. As the stern sank, it seemed Helena had waited to ensure her crew was safe before taking her final plunge. Meanwhile, 88 survivors had drifted to Japanese-held Vella Lavella. For a week, They evaded patrols with help from native scouts and coast watchers, surviving on coconuts and rainwater, moving only at night. On July 16th, destroyers Taylor, Maury, Gidley, and Ralph Talbot executed a daring daylight rescue, evacuating the remaining crew under enemy eyes. Of Helena's 868 crew, 168 men died in Kula Gulf or during the rescue, but 700 survived, saved by the bravery of destroyer crews risking everything, and by the determination of survivors who refused to give up. Helena's story could have ended in the waters of Kula Gulf, another casualty of the grinding Solomon Islands campaign. But legends don't die easily. In Navy wardrooms and enlisted clubs, veterans told tales of the cruiser that fired faster than any ship had a right to. Her rapid-fire barrages became mythic, growing with each retelling. The Navy recognized Helena's extraordinary service with 7 battle stars and the first ever Navy Unit Commendation awarded to a ship, specifically citing Cape Esperance, Guadalcanal, and Kula Gulf 3 battles where Helena's guns helped turn the tide of the Pacific War. Her influence extended beyond medals. Helena's night combat experiences drove changes in American naval tactics and technology. Radar-guided engagement became standard doctrine. The use of flashless powder, a hard-earned lesson, and damage control procedures were revised based on her loss. For decades, Helena rested undisturbed in Kula Gulf. Her exact location remained unknown. Survivors held reunions, numbers dwindling each year, but memories still vivid: the roar of her guns, the feel of deck plates underfoot. The friends who never returned home. In April 2018, Paul Allen's research vessel RV Petrel located Helena at 2,800 feet of water. Cameras confirmed her hull number 50, still visible on the stern. Her turrets remained trained outward, as if ready to resume the fight. The discovery brought closure to surviving crew members and families, confirming her final resting place. Today, Helena is more than a war grave. She represents the thousands of sailors who fought decisive naval battles of World War II. Her story teaches timeless lessons about courage, determination, and sacrifice. The ship that survived Pearl Harbor to become the scourge of the Tokyo Express proved that heroes aren't always invincible. They are sometimes just too stubborn to quit. From her birth in Depression-era Brooklyn to her death in the tropical waters of the Solomons, Helena embodied the American war effort. Built by workers who needed jobs, crewed by boys who became men, commanded by officers learning a new kind of war. She was democracy made steel. The Japanese were right to fear the machine gun cruiser. But Helena was more than guns and radar. She was 868 Americans refusing to accept defeat, turning Pearl Harbor tragedy into triumph at Cape Esperance and Guadalcanal. Even in death, she exacted a price, her guns firing until the water claimed them. In the depths of Kula Gulf, Helena keeps her last watch. Coral grows on her turrets. Fish swim through her passages. But her legacy endures. She remains what she always was, a fighting ship, a testament to determination, and a monument to the generation that saved the world. They called her the machine gun. She lived up to that name until the very end. In the annals of naval history, few ships fought harder, died better, or left a prouder legacy than USS Helena, CL-50. She was, as her crew always knew, one hell of a fighting ship.